at noon.
I'm Denise D'Ascenzo, and welcome to Showboat, the musical journey. For the next 4 weeks, this great American musical will play to a Connecticut audience here at the Bushnell Theater in Hartford, and it is the largest musical to ever squeeze onto this stage. Tonight, you have the best seat in the house as we meet the actors and explore the amazing technology that keeps this big Broadway boat afloat. Here now is your backstage pass with narration from James Earl Jones.
December 1927, New York City, the height of the Roaring '20s. An extraordinary event is about to take place, an event that will shock a fun-loving public and change the course of musical theater forever. It is opening night of a show unlike anything ever seen before. Opening night of Showboat.
Showboat was written by Edna Ferber, and Jerome Kern was first attracted to it and suggested to my father that it would be a good musical idea. I think they were both attracted to those, what I can only call fundamental human elements that were contained in the book, in the story, in the characters, in the people.
I have seen Showboat a few times. It's clearly the groundbreaking American musical, having been done in 1927. It's got one of the most beautiful scores ever written, and it has an extraordinary story. But it was told in 1927 terms. Help loving that man of mine. I thought, well, I've seen a lot of Showboats, but I've never seen the one that thoroughly satisfies me. I'd love to work on it some, just to make the storytelling a little clearer, and I'd like to restore music that no one's heard before, that was written originally, and try and present a somewhat different Showboat, which is still true to the spirit of what Oscar Hammerstein originally intended to do.
Showboat arrived at a time in history when musicals were mostly froth and glitter. There were seldom sustained plots or character development. So when Showboat came along and dealt with serious themes, such as miscegenation and husbands deserting wives, it literally shocked New York theater audiences who were accustomed to much more frivolous entertainment.
Prior to Showboat, it was frankly a lot of fluff. It was a question of music hall mentality. Forget about substance of characters. Forget about emotion. I mean, just let's make it all very, very superficial. Well, Showboat scrapped all those notions, and Showboat was finally prepared to take issue with the issues of the day.
He was born in Mississippi. Your papa was white and your mammy black. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Showboat is interesting because it was the first time on a major musical stage that blacks and whites were actually singing together on the stage. And it was a landmark musical for so many reasons, and that is a very important one.
You know what I'd like to do, Parthy?
No, I don't.
After we shut up the Showboat for the winter, how about you and me making a trip up there?
What are you talking about, Chicago? You must be crazy.
Veteran stage actors Elaine Stritch and Robert Morse played Parthy and Captain Andy.
Gay. I wouldn't care if I never saw him again as long as I live.
The whole idea of Showboat appeals to me, and the manner in which it's being done. I think things like this revive the interest in what the American musical is all about. It seems to be slipping away in the theater, the American musical, and I have very good feelings about it. I think things like this revive the interest in what the American musical is all about.
We're trying to make the evening bright. If you come around tonight, tomorrow night you come around for more. Oh, I'm a little devil. That's what attracted me to Captain Andy, see? Because he is that little devil who twists things and makes things and wants everything to work.
That's enough now, Captain Andy.
Just a sample. What an audience feels is sometimes very powerful. Just a sample, Frank.
My father and Jerry Kern sat down to write Showboat. They didn't sit down deliberately to do something different or revolutionary, but they did sit down to do something that was different and turned out to be revolutionary.
Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein took the idea for their revolutionary musical to the most important producer of the day, the great Florence Ziegfeld. By 1920, Ziegfeld was best known for his flashy follies. During a span of 30 years, he produced more than 80 shows. The Follies alone featured a series of 20 shows between the years 1907 and 1931. Ziegfeld had been producing shows that involved a storyline. They were called book shows, beginning as early as the 1890s, but he had never done a production as serious as Showboat. By 1927, Ziegfeld was at the apex of a highly successful career. He had the background and courage to risk producing Kern and Hammerstein's daring new concept for a stage production of Showboat.
The thing that Showboat did was help bridge operetta and opera. What people have lost sight of was that opera was just musical theater in its day. What Puccini was writing was Guys and Dolls and Showboat. And because of the existence of opera houses and snobbery, we started to separate the two forms. But what Showboat did was challenge that.
In 1927, Showboat changed the course of Broadway musical theater when for the first time, blacks and whites shared the same stage. Up next, how the theater evolved into the powerful art form it is today.
Peter, can we really fly? Just think wonderful thoughts. Summer, Christmas, we're flying! Far out of sight, second star to the right, Wendy, Michael, John, Tinkerbell, come on! Hurry up and follow me, or soon I will be gone.
Kathy Rigby is Peter Pan at the Bushnell, March 31st through April 5th. Call 246-6807.
Swim and birds gotta fly. I gotta love one man till I die. Can't help loving that man of mine.
Showboat was so important because it was the first musical play.
Tell me he's slow.
After Showboat, the history of musical theater was clearly going to be changed forever.
Loving that man of mine. know it, Queenie?
I sure do. But I ain't never heard nobody but colored folks sing that song.
Without any question, Jerome Kern is the father of American popular music. If you'd asked, and I once did ask Richard Rodgers, who was his inspiration? Jerome Kern. George Gershwin, Jerome Kern. Irving Berlin, Jerome Kern. Jerome Kern was the father of them all.
Back that day is fine, the sun will shine.
The score to Showboat is interesting because it does reflect the music of the time, the jazz era, turn of the century, music around World War I.
I first became aware of Showboat when I was in a big band in Montreal, and we did a medley of the tunes from it. And as recently as Miles Davis, I think, we saw the sort of reincarnation a la 1970 style of all the music of Jerome Kern.
She doesn't know I love her. How could she know I love her? Sitting in her room below.
One of Oscar Hammerstein's contributions to American musical theater is that he used songs to advance the story. You can hear that clearly in many of the lyrics he wrote.
Sometimes we meet, she smiles, and oh, her smile's divine. It's such a treat to hear her say, hasn't the weather been fine?
What was more exciting, even, and more revolutionary was that when the character sings a song, that song was written in the style of that character.
It's surely not his brain.
What was also revolutionary is that the only reason a character ever sung a song was because it was an emotional moment in the story.
Love him. Because he's... I don't know. Because he's just my Bill.
I think Kern was up there with George Gershwin. We don't know it as clearly as we do Gershwin, because Gershwin wrote concerti and symphonies and a whole lot of orchestral pieces that were away from the theater. But Kern was that great a musician. And in fact, I hope that this Showboat will illustrate the depth of his serious musicianship.
Jerome Kern and my father worked very intimately together. In their case, the music always came first. And then my father would set the music to words.
That's the old man that I'd like to be. What does he care?
Hammerstein cared greatly about human beings, and it was manifested, I think, all the way through his life in the words and lyrics, if you will. Such an effectively intelligent man.
The long-lasting appeal of the Kern-Hammerstein score was proven again recently when Michelle Bell sang one of the most memorable of their songs at a concert in Times Square celebrating Broadway. In 1927, the Broadway theater was not what it is today. Blacks and whites were seldom seen on the same stage. Oscar Hammerstein committed himself to changing that situation with this show.
He, in fact, wrote 3 musicals that dealt with the problem of racism. 3 in one lifetime. 3 hits, A Showboat, South Pacific, and then The King and I. It was an issue that consumed him.
My father had a strong sense of fairness about people. So that when he had to deal with unpleasant experiences, such as being black in the South 100 years ago, he had great empathy for that. When he wrote Old Man River, for instance, he expressed things in that song that nobody had expressed before, certainly no white man. But he seemed to have the ability to lose himself in that sense of being a person in that condition, in that situation. He expressed the idea that you don't grow up with prejudice in your mind. It's put in there by people who bring you up and who teach you these things.
I think that when Showboat hit America, it portrayed a vivid, though possibly in parts unfavorable, view of the black role in the South. But it was a truthful view. That's the way it was. That's the way history is. We can't dispute history. We may not like all of it, but we can't dispute it.
Better ask the old river what he thinks. He knows all about them boys. He knows all about everything.
Joe does a lot of work. In the previous productions, you just didn't know quite what he did, you know. In this production, you can see it. It's all physical out there on stage. He basically views everything and encapsulates it within the song of Old Man River as saying, you know, what we go through as black people, it still goes on. Life still goes on, okay? So no matter what goes on, love story, triangle, whatever, within Showboat, as the plot thickens with the love interest of Magnolia and Ravenel, and there's also a strong love interest with Joe and Queenie, and with Joe and the river, because he looks as if the river is as being something that's very, very solitary.
I feel that not only in Showboat, but in any other vehicle that personifies any kind of human suffering or of any kind, brings a certain dignity to that particular race, because people immediately, their feelings go to those people that are depicted in it.
Showboat has achieved a number of theatrical milestones, including a Tony First. That story and more as our journey continues.
27, rare film footage, rehearsals for the Ziegfeld production of Showboat. Many famous performers have appeared in the numerous stage productions and 3 motion pictures of Showboat. Norma Terrace, Charles Winninger, W.C. Fields, Cedric Hardwick, Stephen Fletcher, and countless others, including the great Paul Robeson, who played Joe on both stage and screen. Showboat had been a high point for many of these performers, but particularly for one doe-eyed actress named Helen Morgan. Helen created the role of Julie and became one of the most popular performers in America.
Actually, I was born in Toronto, October 1900. My mother was a struggling waitress at the Roadhouse restaurant at the CN rail yards. All those rowdy workers, train tracks everywhere. She told me it was cold the winter I was born. She was all alone then. No doctor or midwife or anybody. I guess that's why music ended up as a way of life for me. Sort of a warm escape from harsh reality.
Because he's wonderful, because he's just my Bill. He can't play golf or tennis or polo.
The role of Julie in this production is played by Lonette McKee. She's the first black actress to perform the role in a major North American production.
Dozens of men that I know.
Julie is the classic tragic role. I won't call her a heroine, but I'll say she's a classic tragic. I find Julie's story is quite significant today, actually. I can certainly sympathize with why a woman in the 1800s would choose to pass as white rather than to live as a slave.
You have a case of miscegenation on board.
Wisdom comes with struggle. And certainly we've struggled, so hopefully we're wiser for it.
Because he's... I don't know. Because he's just my Bill.
One thing that's interesting about this production is Hal's vision to make the music alive, keep the story going. So we've taken some of the operatic moments out and put them into a new context with the dance arrangements that David Crane and Susan Stroman have created. And the time changes within the story of Showboat are much clearer now and much stronger.
Susan called me and said, you know, the Charleston, which is the last number in the show, was in fact invented by the black community, then taken by the white community and interpreted by it, but obviously its genesis and the juice of it was created by the black community, so that she's illustrating in the show.
Come and what I've seized is the opportunity to show where young Kim and all her white friends learned the Charleston from. And I'm able to do that in the montage when we go through 25 years. I have 3 different street performers during that montage. One starts out as a one-man band. This is on the streets of Chicago. And the doorman shoos him away. Then we go to about 1915, and we have 2 black tap dancers. The doorman shoos them away. Then we get to 1921, and we have 3 black Charleston kids and a trumpet player and a black doorman who allows them to stay there with white folks watching. So it's very clear that they are learning the Charleston from these kids on the street. It was usually the blacks who invented it, and the whites stiffened it up and took it to another dimension.
Many great actresses have played the role of Queenie. The original production featured Tess Gardella, and the wonderful Hattie McDaniel performed the part in the 1936 film version. Hattie later became the first black performer to win an Academy Award for her role in Gone with the Wind.
My heart is too full to tell you just how I feel. And may I say thank you. And God bless you.
Hey! Where you think you going? Yeah, you! Don't you know this show is starting soon?
In the past, Queenie was played as this big black woman, black mammy, if you will. And certainly, I could not have possibly played her that way. I don't see myself that way. And I'm not taking anything from the actresses that have done it in the past. But I could not have done it that way, and I'm glad that I'm getting an opportunity to do it the way that I see her naturally. I don't look for anything outside of myself to, quote unquote, say who I am. I know who I am. I know what I am. And that's why I can readily play the role of Queenie and be happy about it.
We found there's a wealth of music in Showboat. The first production was well into 5 hours long. A lot of Kern's music has been cut from various productions. There's ragtime influence in the show. There's Charleston, there's foxtrot. There is band music. There is very classically symphonic music. Captain Andy's theme, which is interesting. Captain Andy's floating show, because this backwards is Old Man River. So what Kern did is he has the same very simple four-note melody, and inverted one way, it's Captain Andy and the excitement of the showboat and the perhaps naive attitudes of some of the people in the story, and backwards and slow, it is the theme of the river, which never stops.
When we come back, how technology allows art in almost a magical way to imitate life. Stay with us.
Big news from Mohegan.
I think the most important thing about Hal Prince is that he directs with a cinematic style. He understands the concept of seamless transition. The musical flows. It never is interrupted. It never halts. It's always moving from scene to scene in a very effective way.
The staging and the transition of the sets and the people moving the sets is very important. We never stop. We never have a blackout. Everyone moves the furniture. Everything moves right along.
Harold Prince is a really designer's director. I mean, you couldn't ask for anyone better. When I met him originally, I was actually living on my boat, and he never quite understood that. I mean, I always thought that was pretty funny, living on a boat. There's a paperback book out of photographs of Natchez in 1890 through the 20s. And I said, why don't you call these people up? And they turned out to have 250,000 glass negatives.
The Gandy Historical Collection of photographs shows thousands of images of life in Natchez, a typical small town around the turn of the century.
Beginning around 1870, they began to build bigger and better boats, and for about 20 to 25 years, the traffic on the river was probably greater than it had ever been before. The biggest one was one called the J.M. White, which was built in 1878.
It was more than 300 feet long and 90 feet wide. It had a fine Chickering piano in the Grand Salon. It had room for maybe 250 people to eat. And it was built to be a luxurious passenger boat, but also to carry cotton.
Showboats featured a wide variety of entertainment, from circuses to novelty acts to drama and dance. Almost anything that would draw an audience could be seen on a showboat.
This was kind of before the organization of actors, you know, Inequity. They recruited all these people. I mean, it was like, it was really like summer stock on a barge. It must have been wonderful, actually.
You had vaudeville turns, you had chorus numbers often, and you had melodrama.
Showboats were not self-powered. They were always pushed or towed from one port to another and then tied up and left there. As long as people would pay to see the shows, they would stay.
It was the railroad that finally brought an end to the grand showboat era.
A harbor meant for me, I drift along with my fancy.
Character Gaylord Ravenel is he's a river gambler. He's a man with a past, a checkered past. He's If you grew up in the 60s or 70s, he would be one of these people that stayed in school forever, probably trying to figure out what to do. He has no direction in life, but he has a certain joie de vivre about him.
Let's imagine we've just met.
But we really have.
Well, yes, but let's suppose...
When he encounters Magnolia, he interjects a new element into her life, and she into his. I mean, the very first words that Ravenel says are, "Sometimes I thank my lucky stars my heart is free, but other times I wonder, where's the mate for me?"
Others find peace of mind in pretending. Couldn't you, couldn't I, couldn't we?
When Oscar Hammerstein wrote Magnolia into the musical, I believe she was the first, one of the first, if not the first, leading lady to actually have an emotional journey and not just be one of the cuties in the chorus.
We could make believe I love you. We could make believe that you love me.
Others find peace of mind in pretending. Couldn't you,
couldn't I?
Showboat is a wonderful show for a lighting designer. It has everything in it. It has dawn, sunset, the river, Mississippi. It has Chicago. It has every time of day, night, all the seasons of the year.
48. Go to Q48.
We're using a lot of water. The whole thing is on the Mississippi. Even when we're in Chicago, we want to feel the river everywhere. So we have water under the stage that we can light up, and we can open parts of the stage and light this water up. So there's a sort of shimmering. The stage is packed with scenery. All the scenery is very three-dimensional. It has to be lit from exactly the right angle to bring out all the shadows and the feeling and texture of each piece. Eugene Lee has done this remarkable job, and it's very realistic, but it's sort of super realistic. So the lighting takes the shapes and forms and makes them come to life.
There probably are no larger legit shows than Showboat. It's incredibly big. I'm sure that all of the people you talked to will tell you how big Showboat is. It's big.
Technology, of course, is changing enormously. I mean, nowadays we have computers and moving lights. We have some very original equipment in this show that some of it's never been used before. We're searching for a sort of an epic quality. An epic in two senses, in a sort of Brechtian sense of a sort of very powerful pictures of light and vast sort of shafts of sunlight. So it's all sort of super realistic on the one hand, and then in super romantic at the same time. The analogy of Gone with the Wind and the sort of off into the sunset at the end is hopefully what we're going to evoke.
Showboat, it's big, it's computerized, and it all has to fit into a small area backstage here at the Bushnell. They've done it before with productions such as Miss Saigon and Phantom of the Opera, but even those shows don't compare to the size of Showboat. How do they do it? We'll show you coming up.
On an all-new accurate, straightforward, comprehensive, Channel 3 Eyewitness News One Choice. That's why we're Connecticut's news station.
Showboat travels actually from city to city in 25 53-foot tractor trailers. It is the biggest show to ever be on the road.
Phantom was a large show for us. Miss Saigon raised the bar even farther. Showboat is by far the largest show to ever play in the city of Hartford, and indeed at the Bushnell. To get this show into the building, we decided and determined that we would do whatever was necessary to make the show happen, including moving an entire wall and an entire floor of offices on the stage area to make sure the boat fits in the building.
it is a smaller space than we've ever been in before. So we actually had to re-engineer the Cotton Blossom, or the showboat, to actually come and take a turn in the deck so it wouldn't run into the wall, clearly. And that does create some problems for us here. There was a huge I-beam that obstructed where we needed to have the showboat end up off stage. And they were good enough to pull that beam out of here and do some major construction so we could put our show in. The boat in its full configuration is over 40 feet long and is almost 30 feet high. The show is so big and has so much scenery that we can't have the entire show on stage together at one given point in time. So what we have to do is we come in at the beginning of the evening before the audience, an hour and a half before the audience comes in, and we have to take all of the second act scenery and actually fly it out on winches 30 feet overhead so that we can run the first act. And then at intermission, we have to flip that. So we take Act 1 and take it out 30 feet overhead, and then we can run Act 2.
Reality hits. The lightning rod happens when you see the first truck roll up and the equipment starts to roll in. And that energy, that charge of electricity, continues as you see one truck turn into 10 trucks, turn into 15, into 25 or 26 trucks. The amount of human energy and commitment it takes to making sure the show works, and when that first person walks through the theater on Tuesday night to see the finished product, is enormous.
We have a closing in Toronto on Saturday, and then it's just about 5 or 6 days later, we actually do a show here in Hartford. And so what we do is we end up bringing what we call the show-to-show equipment, which is all of the costumes and all of the props and all of this big rolling scenery that you see behind me here. So we're in the midst of what we call the show-to-show portion of this load-in. We've already laid the deck, we've laid the foundation. Now we come in with the actual scenery, props, and costumes, and we'll do a show 5 or 6 days later. We have to hang trusses out in the auditorium for lighting and for sound, so that we can, of course, bring to the show the level of sound so that everyone is comfortable with that, and of course the lighting positions that the designers have dictated or mandated for this particular production. So we come in a week or so, a week and a half in advance, and we actually have to core through the existing ceiling and create holes that are about 8 inches in diameter. We run chain motors down through that, and we go up to the steel of the building. So we actually go up to architectural steel, and we raise these trusses that weigh tons with all of our lighting instruments on them, and then we run those cables back to the dimmers.
Bringing a mega musical to Hartford takes 2 years of hard work by a lot of people and thousands of hours, from the initial phone conversations to the entire staff getting together to plot out whether physically the show will fit into the building, adding new electrical circuits, right down to the ticketing system to make sure that we can handle the capacity of thousands and thousands of people calling in to buy tickets. All of those things lead us to opening night this next Tuesday night.
Tomorrow night you'll come around for more.
So you can see what it takes to bring this big show on the road. Coming up, one of Broadway's most respected directors talks about how he pulls it all together. Stay with us.
Looking for an excuse to buy a Dodge?
Showboat opened in New York in the famous Ziegfeld Theater, which was built in 1926.
Greatest show. There he is. There he is, Torrance Ziegfeld. Get a good look?
It was reputed to be the grandest palace of entertainment in New York. It had seats upholstered in gold, and the entire auditorium was decorated with a huge mural featuring medieval characters. Ziegfeld claimed the mural was bigger than the one in the Sistine Chapel. The theater was designed by the longtime friend of Ziegfeld's, Joseph Urban, who was responsible for sets for many of Ziegfeld's shows dating back to 1914. Urban was recognized as one of the world's most talented theater artists, and he designed the original settings for Showboat. In 1929, the man who produced the most important musical of the time lost all his money in the stock market crash. And a few years later, on the verge of bankruptcy, Florence Ziegfeld died. And in 1960, his magnificent theater was unceremoniously demolished to make way for modern commercial development.
Thanks. Can you hold it for a second? We got one more coming through. Well, they're going to have to wait.
Hal Prince did not want this to look like a musical comedy, and hopefully I have kept away from that. And the only time that I get a little glitzy, I suppose, is in the Trocadero and the turn of the century New Year's Eve.
Under the guidance of Tony Award-winning designer Florence Klotz, the Showboat wardrobe department took more than 125,000 hours to make the 450 costume.
I'm sorry, I took a look at the sketch and that's it.
Costumes for the female chorus alone required over 6 kilometers of fabric. More than 400 caps, hats, bandanas, and hair bows were handmade.
I work very well with lighting designers, so because, you know, lights can make or break you, you know. So he's got all my fabrics for every scene, and that's up to him now to do the gels that will bring forward the colors. This is not a movie, so I'm trying to get your eye, color-wise, to go to who the principal person is. So therefore, I do it like a painting, so that your eye will go to the red, who happens to be the main character.
So what happens now is there's an entr'acte, and the entr'acte...
Harold Prince probably is more involved with the way what we are looking at looks like and how that supports the story at hand, the actors at hand, the material at hand, and he understands the importance of it to such an extent that every show that Harold Prince directs is in its own way a living painting.
Hal is able to back up everything he says with this incredible wealth of knowledge that he has and amount of research that he has done. And that's what's so joyous about working with him, because no matter what we do, he can tell you why you are doing it.
He's a wonderful director for me because I wouldn't dare bore him. Wouldn't dare. So when I come in the morning, I say, I've got to get his attention. I've got to make him laugh. I've got to make him cry, whatever. Now, watch, Hal. I remember
Yeah, I got it. I'm glad.
It's 8 o'clock now.
Hal's concern for social issues has been reflected all through his work in the theater. I mean, whether it was dealing with Nazis in Germany and Cabaret, or dealing with pogroms in Russia, with Fiddler on the Roof, or street gangs and whites fighting Puerto Ricans in West Side Story. It's always been there, and it's always been a compelling factor in driving his work.
We have 2 separate ensembles. When you hear everybody singing together at the end of the show, it's an extraordinary experience that rivals any I've had.
Ensembles have beautifully danced together and gelled together, and it seems to be very happy, and I believe that comes from them trusting the creative team. And if you can trust the creative team, then I think the actors will give you more and more and more.
There are many roles in this show, many more than I'm used to in a musical, because it covers so many years. There are 8 or 10 important roles in the show. And each one is a major responsibility for the artist playing it.
Showboat has lasted a long time, and it continues to have appeal for audiences all around the world. The reasons for that have to do with the elements, the dramatic and human elements that the story deals with. There are fundamental emotions that everyone can understand and identify with, and it has great appeal.
There aren't too many opportunities when an audience can cry, and cry at all the right things. Cry at the relationship of family, cry at the breakup of family, cry at matters that tug at the heartstrings of decent people.
Well, I really firmly believe that any kind of music can make tremendous changes, Showboat included. It can make great changes in people's lives. I feel that there are people today walking around, and I'm speaking of people of all races, certainly including the black race, that are not aware of that period in, speaking of a black person, in their history. for some reason we want to deny in certain factions the fact that this took place. This type of thinking was there. It was there. And people lived through it. Blacks lived through it. Whites lived through it. And today, fortunately, in certain environmental circumstances, we hopefully know better. And we have grown to be greater human beings because of this. And I hope that the performance of Showboat will increase that capability within us as human beings.
So many things that happen in Showboat are applicable to the problems of today. It's warm, and God, with all we're watching today, and all we're hearing on the news today, and all we're seeing within the family in this country in any country, is so scary. And in Showboat, you've got it. You've got a family sticking together.
A love of family, and family in the larger sense, the family of man. That's what the show's about. That's what Oscar Hammerstein was about.
And so with this production at the Bushnell, the journey of Showboat continues. And through the years, it's a journey audiences have taken straight to the heart. For the next 4 weeks, it's all aboard here at the Bushnell for Showboat, a great American classic. I'm Denise D'Ascenzo. Thanks for joining us.
Next time on Martha Stewart Living.
On a recent hike through a forest of